Hello, hello. Pete and Eric here with Bending Rules, where we talk about all things entrepreneurial, some stuff society and culture, but basically our typical get together and trying to help entrepreneurs and others think about, how to navigate life, building a business and funding the business. And in fact, that's where I think we're going to start with that. Eric and I last time, like we were hanging out, as we were winding down our podcast, I saw this look in your eye because Seed Capital came up and he was ready to dive into it. And we were going to start riffing on Seed Capital. Do we need it? And how do you finance your company and all this kind of stuff? And I basically had to, in my own mind, I went like, we better cut this thing off. We're going to be talking another hour.
Oh yeah.
And no one who's going to want to listen to us for another hour? You and I could have kept going. But I was like, man, this is going to be good stuff. But people are going to tune out. So hold on. Let's pick this up where we left off. And, in all seriousness, like the seed capital thing, like when, now that we're going to hit this, Eric, like when I think about advice like entrepreneurs ask me for, and that I've done some consulting with, or just talks around coffee or the fire or beer or whatever, a lot of it comes back to that they all think about how am I going to finance? How am I going to grow? Mm-hmm. And it's just sort of, it's the juggernaut. Like if you can't figure that out, no matter what your idea is, you're kind of done. Right. So if that means you got to reach into your own pocket, if you have enough, your family and friends, seed capital, we should define that a little bit because there's different stages of capital, but you and I have kind of taken different paths with that, and there's different trade-offs with those choices. And so I think financing or capital, or just, I'd love to get your perspective. Like, how did you look at financing your investments, and, what were your considerations when you're thinking about, okay, I got this goal. I want to get in a place where I can, be retired by the age of 45, whatever your goal was, the number, I've got X amount. How are you going to do it? And then I'll jump back with kind of my story, and let's see if we can, find some nuggets in there for people to lean on a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, a couple of podcasts back, you said something to me. You asked the question, if I were to do it again, as far as like starting over as a career, would I do the same thing again?
Yeah.
And that I've just been chewing on that question ever since, because I said I do the same thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, was that really true? Is that exactly what I do? Because there's some other directions I would wanted to go now that I know differently. But I wound myself back into seed capital and realized, I do the same thing again.
Okay.
I might take that first couple of profits and then spin off and do something different. As a result of that. But yeah, I didn't have access to capital. I had no idea how to come up with any kind of money. It just like I had nothing.
Yeah.
And I really had very few ideas and very few examples of how to do it.
Right.
I knew people borrowed money for college. You had credit cards. You buy a car, you get a loan, but you could get a loan for a house. So there's these conventional things, these vehicles that you can borrow money on, and banks are sort of liberal when it comes to giving up that kind of money.
They get the formula.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if I was to do it again, I would have had to go right back to buying a house and putting as little down as possible, because I didn't have much.
Right.
And that's kind of like an important part of everybody's story. When I meet people that are doing well in business or have done well or trying to do well, I don't say it almost ever, but I'm always trying to find the seed capital story. Like, where did you come up with your first $10? I want to know how you turned that into 20.
Right.
Because that's way more interesting generally to me. But I have a tough time doing that because a lot of people don't like to talk about finance. You know what I mean? Like, it's like maybe
too personal or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. And a lot of people see capital already had a rolling start. So, that's not as big of a deal to me. But when somebody's straight out of low cash, I'm like, oh man. And generally with the other investors that I've dealt with and kind of co-emerged with, through the process, we talk money. We talk money blatantly.
Yeah.
Numbers and, how'd that deal go for you, Staley? It's like, well, you were getting in pretty deep on that remodel. I'm like, oh man, I spent too much on that one.
Yeah.
but it looks like the market's kind of sustaining that.
We'll
So,
support it, yeah.
so I lucked out and I got away with it, but I still made a profit,
Yeah.
but only in a place like Bend, not everywhere is like Bend. But I get back to the point of it is that where did that seed capital come from? And I'm kind of excited to share my story.
Yeah.
And every story is different. So that's kind of the fun thing. Even if you're straight out of low cash, you come at it from different angles. And
For sure.
this might be a little long-winded, but I was 12 years old and I had a job at a rabbitry in Oak Ridge.
Okay.
And there was like 3,000 rabbits in this big barn.
Okay.
And my entry-level job was shoveling manure underneath the rabbit cages. So,
yeah,
I'm wearing really tall boots and
yeah,
I have a gunny sack with a steel sleeve and a pitchfork, and I'd get 10 cents a bag.
yeah,
And so, pretty quick I could get $1. I'm 12 and this is, I don't know what, early 80s,
yeah,
And so I'm like, man, I'm doing well. I'm making money. And I wasn't doing well and I wasn't making that much money, but for what I thought, that was a pretty big deal at the time. And my uncle had a 1952 Chevy pickup sitting in the grass at his place. The kind of truck that's like the Country Time Lemonade truck.
yeah, yeah,
It's really this cool looking truck.
yeah.
And I told him how much I liked that. And he goes, well, you want to buy it? I go, I don't know.
You're like 12.
Yeah. I'm making like $1 an hour.
Yeah.
Shoveling manure.
Probably don't really have a good idea what a car would even cost. Yeah.
No. And he said he'd sell it to me and he would take $50 payments a month. And I was like, wow, that's mind blowing that I could come up with a truck at the age of 12.
Yeah.
And I jumped in on it. So I bought that truck and I made $50 payments and shoveled a lot of manure and worked my way up at the rabbitry. I wasn't always, shoveling shit, but that was a start.
Yeah.
And it's going way back. This is like so far back in the origin of seed capital that I just got to tell it though.
Yeah, it is pretty far back, but I'm interested in where this kind of connects up actually.
Yeah. Let's see if we can get there.
Yeah. No, seriously. Cause like the roots of, how we went about and why we went about financing something a certain way, they start at different places for different people. So this is, I'm pretty super, curious about this. So sorry to interrupt, but tell me about like what happened from there. So you started paying down the car.
Yeah.
$50 a month. Okay.
Yeah. And he gave it to me. I already had it, but I was just making payments. So I'm working on this thing too and sanding it down and paint and tuning this thing in, making it pretty cool and got it painted even. I'm still not even of legal age to drive.
Yeah.
But my sister, she was going to COCC, or no, it was at Lane Community College over in Eugene, and she didn't have a car, and so I lent her my truck.
Yeah.
And it had to paint already, and I was already kind of halfway through the restoration on the thing, and somebody ran through a stoplight and T-boned that truck.
Your truck.
My truck.
Oh shit.
So I never even got to drive it. I mean, I did. I drove around illegally, but I could hardly reach the pedals.
Right.
Yeah. But so this first project gets T-boned by somebody running a red light, and I was devastated. But I thought, well, there'll be insurance, and sure enough, the insurance came around, and it was quite a bit. They gave me a lot more than I thought that truck was worth. Back in the day, insurance companies used to do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And my brother had a '66 GTO already. He's kind of a motorhead and really knows how to work on cars. I didn't, and I really loved that car. I thought that was the coolest thing. And so I took that insurance money. I bought a GTO. It took a while, and I finally found one. And but I think I paid $3,500 for it. That was almost what I had.
And how old are you at this point? Like 14 or 13, 14?
At this stage, by the time I got the GTO, I was 15.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was on the way to driving.
Yeah.
And so anyway, this GTO is sort of kind of the real origin story.
Already trading up basically though to GTO. Okay.
Yeah. And the GTO is going to be worth a lot more in the future because all the hillbillies and rednecks, they know that those old, muscle cars are they're only going up in value. They're not making more of them. And so it's a special, unique thing. Well, so I'm fixing this thing up and I'm driving around, and flash forward, I go through high school, I go through college. I still have this car, and I get through college, and now I have this GTO that is like my redneck bank account, of assets, and I'm saving up to buy a house. And, I at this point maybe have like $3,000 of savings, just in a bank account somewhere, like some checking account,
Yeah.
plus this car. And I'm working at Hewlett Packard in Corvallis. I'm trying to jump through this, but it's an interesting sequence. And this guy, Jeff Meggy, comes over and he goes, hey, let's talk about money. And I'm like, okay, sure, whatever. We had a little bit of free time in between processes, and he always wanted to talk about money. He's just this business guy.
Yeah.
I don't use the word mentor, but he's totally my mentor. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's like, and so he was just always kind of poking and prodding. And
that's another topic I want to come back on. It's not to do about the mentor topic. So put a pin in that, because that could be a big one. But let's go through this. So this guy's one of your mentors. So sorry again, but you'll help me remember these things in my older age. Like, oh yeah, remember we were talking about mentor. Okay, go. So you guys start talking finance,
and he'd come over and he just wouldn't leave me alone, and he would talk to everybody else too. But he was trying to find people who were interested in talking about it, because he was buying a duplex at that point, and fixing it up, and he'd already owned a house, and we're all young at this point, like 26-ish, 25-ish,
Yeah.
And I'm like, this guy's a dynamo. He's doing all kinds of stuff. He's got stones, risk tolerance,
Yeah.
So I was kind of stoked on that, and he knew what he was talking about. And he goes, "You want to buy a house then, right? Is that what you're thinking?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Okay, well, what kind of, you have a down payment? Do you have enough money to buy this place? You need 3% at the time. 3%. You got 3% on a $100,000 house. Maybe 5%.
Yeah.
What do you got?" And I go, "Well, I've got about $3,000 saved in the bank account, and I've got this GTO." And he goes, "How much is that GTO worth?" I go, "I don't know, about $5,000, probably right about now." He goes, "Sell it." And this is my redneck bank account.
Yeah.
And I was personally offended when he said that, so free of emotion.
Yeah.
Emotionless, just said, "Get rid of that thing, get that and get into a house."
Right.
And I was pissed. I was like, "Dude, man, you don't understand. This thing's going to be worth more money next year."
Yeah.
And he goes, "How much more money will it be worth next year?" I go, "Probably like 10% more." He goes, "What's that? $500? I go, "Yeah." And so it's going to be $5,500 next year, and like, wow, look at me. I'm rolling.
Yeah.
I'm a baller.
Yeah.
I'm a redneck. I'm a redneck baller.
Appreciate. Why would I sell that?
And I have all the memories too. So it was emotional.
Yeah, for sure.
But he was just so callous about it. And he goes, "Okay, well, if you buy a house, at $100,000, because back then houses were $130,000 in Corvallis, $100,000 somewhere around there for starter homes.
Yeah.
Pieces of shit, the old ones too. It wasn't like it was, a Hayden home that was just old.
Yeah.
It's like 70 years old kind of a house.
Gotcha.
Anyway, so $100,000, and he goes, "So if you bought that house, the average appreciation rate in the United States of a house is 4%.
Yeah.
Long history, long history." And he goes, "What's 4% of 100,000?
Yeah.
I go, $4,000. And it was checkmate. He had me right there, psychologically, emotionally.
What else is there to talk about, right? At that point, like if you can get in, and yeah.
And
of course, you have the interest you're paying on that loan, and that's, the write-offs of that, et cetera, et cetera. Is it? Do you see that 4%? But I mean, I hear what you're saying. What is that? What is that sort of in its sort of realized sense?
Yeah.
With expenses, you got to go into the house and maintenance. I mean, there's. But anyways, I got you.
You saying I shouldn't have sold that GTO? Damn it!
Unfortunately, that's the downside of my thinking sometimes, is that if I get too analytical about it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
yeah.
But I think we both have something in common, you'll see in a minute, with not getting over analytical and going on, this makes sense to do type of an investment. But right. I want you to finish this concept here.
Well, this story is more or less all but over. I mean, I was at the point emotionally, I was pissed that he was saying I should sell this car, and just so devoid of any kind of nostalgia, history, emotion. And I kind of wanted to smack him. I'm like, man, this guy's a bastard. But as soon as he caught me with that 4% on 100,000, I was like, checkmate.
Yeah.
And I sold the GTO, and within 6 months I bought a house.
Yep.
And I paid less than it was worth because I shopped around. I knew values. I was obsessed with values.
Yeah.
And every neighborhood, I mean, I couldn't turn it off.
Did you when you bought this house, you're obsessed with values, but did you also do some work on the house again and sort of get it Okay, to a place where you needed to sort of the little things you do to improve that place to make it worth sort of X dollars more and this and that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So you buy well, you got the 4%, national average 4%,
Yeah.
but you buy well. So then you've already pocketed a couple bucks on the
Yeah.
purchase, which is really where you make your money.
Yeah.
And then I added value, but you also had that 2 out of 5 year tax-free capital gain deal that was going.
Yep.
And it still is.
It still is.
It still is. It's like the biggest barn door of opportunity on tax code for
real estate,
for the redneck hillbilly bank account guy like me.
For starting with nothing and no cash, no one kind of giving you seed capital and this and sort of a framework into which to launch. But there's a pattern. Again, we talked about this last week. There's a pattern I see with you and sometimes with other entrepreneurs too. And I'm trying to like put these people in a little bit, put that entrepreneur pattern type into a bit of a bucket. And it's not totally fair, but the bucket I kind of have you in some respects is because it started with a car that you were fixing, right? You got that old car beater from your uncle, but then you said you were sanding it and improving it. Like you're just a guy that had, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, and you find the value, you know how to improve things. You can see the delta on the improvement.
Yeah.
That's an interesting eye for being an entrepreneur. Not everybody has I would say I'm not that entrepreneur. I have made some real estate investments that have been improvement based and they've been fine, but that's a different kind of an eye. And it started, which is why I find it interesting, is like you got to figure out your core strengths. Some point in life, you got to figure out your core strengths. And for you, you're kind of figuring out it pretty early because you're 12 years old.
Yeah.
And you had that eye. But you wanted the car, that was emotional, but you sanded it, improved it. And probably from that perspective, the insurance company saw it and you got more value than it was worth, really. And you knew that, but you had put in sort of the work, even at that young age. So I think that's a really important part of your story. Aside from how you finance it, which is also an important part of the seed capital story, which is probably more, this is going to be more the path that most people need to take, right? They're not going to have resources someone's not going to write them a check for $100,000 and say, go for it. I mean, there are those stories and there are, that's venture capital, right? That's Silicon Valley. And it's even Bend, Oregon now. Like it's not, exclusive to that region, but I don't want to derail you too much because I want you to finish your thought process on it because I have some more questions for you. But on the financing, I'm assuming that led to the next thing, And is that sort of basically what got everything going? Or was there another inflection point in your life where you were like, okay, I need even more money. How do I got to leverage this or do that? Anything else you would offer sort of on the seed capital, progression for you, like how you thought about money as you progressed,
Yeah. Well, the part that I think back most to is just that first leverage that my uncle gave me an opportunity to have and deal with that debt, set the stage for, a little bit of risk tolerance. I mean, just a little bit.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Because I talk about risk tolerance.
Yeah, you and I talked about this last time and how you, and I think this is true, people kind of develop a level of risk tolerance as they get more comfortable with their first investment than their second. And then it's like, oh yeah, of course I could have done that 3 times,
Yeah.
And some people just have it right away, but you were more incremental with it. I feel like I've been more incremental with my risk tolerance level, but you got to have some, and you got to turn up that dial as time goes on if you want to sort of get a result,
right?
An economic result, let's say. When you say that's true, like you can't just kind of sit back forever and hope you find like the ultimate deal, right? At some point it's risk.
Yeah. I might even derail off of the entrepreneurship part of it and say every aspect of life requires an element of risk.
Yeah.
In order to upgrade or improve.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's true. I'm just saying that as almost a question. If I can't think of anything that,
like, give me the context in which.
Well, sports,
Oh yeah. Okay, sports. Yeah.
Straight away, and then
that's the other analogy. Yeah.
And health, health. You need to. Well, now I need to take a chance on eating asparagus or some other kind of vegetable that maybe you don't really like, or maybe you find out you do like.
Yeah.
But it also is good for you.
Right.
Traveling.
Yeah.
Finance, relationships.
Like you're comfortable with traveling in this environment, being exposed to different things, and. As opposed to not doing something based out of fear.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really why a lot of people don't pursue a risk, because there's an element of fear there that they can't overcome? I mean, at the kind of core of the emotion, I think about, stuff I do in the backcountry, and I'm not trying to put myself in a position where I'm could get hurt, but there's always a percentage of that has to factor in, and you do the calculation kind of a thing, and it's hard to unwind that behavior if it's just a little bit of part of who you are.
Yeah.
Well,
It's not all that risky when you're backcountry like yourself, and you've been doing it for years. You've studied it like crazy. You know it inside and out, and you know yourself also well enough to know that when the conditions are a little bit like avalanche style, that your own tolerance is going to say, I'm going to back out. It's not worth it today. Those powder turns that I can see that are just going to be all mine. I can look away. I can back away from that. That's hard to do.
It's hard to do. You got to do it. But let me ask you something else. Why did you feel that time that you had to go it completely alone? I mean, you've got a family, you got some friends. Is there any scenario, either that time or later on, where you were like, hey, I'm going to create a investment opportunity for someone to come in, or you just, or maybe it's or you made enough progress where you didn't really need to do that, and you could just sort of do these things your own. And, you've done a lot of with bank financing and working deals banks, so you know how to use debt in this, to achieve an outcome. But because my story is quite a bit different, and I'm going to tell you here in a minute.
Today's the day.
And we'll talk about what were the trade-offs of those things, because I want to ask myself the same question. Would I go do it again the same way?
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to say no to that when you have a result that's worked out pretty good for you, right? I mean, of course, there's little fine things that you would tweak and stuff like that. But why didn't you ever see a scenario, or maybe you did? Tell me, what was your thought about raising money from other people or institutions or whatever?
I hated it.
I knew. I could have answered that question for, because I know you. You have a lot of. You wanted to go it alone. You've got this. I gotta prove it to myself kind of thing.
Yeah, I was talking to the last couple of podcasts back about if there's 3 different doors to go through. I'll use a sawzall to cut a hole through it and crawl through.
Right.
And the other door's just open.
Yeah.
That's one of the ways that I step on my own foot. I have a buddy who says that stepping on your own dick.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It looks like that guy's standing on his own dick. You know what it is? But you held yourself back a little bit.
Exactly.
In one way or another. And so, yeah, because I hate borrowing money and I have too much pride.
Yeah.
It was really difficult for me to buy that first house.
Yeah.
Even though it was a place to live in and I wasn't going to be paying rent, I knew all the benefits. I mean, I'd been reading about it already and studying up on how to do remodels. And I was a couple steps ahead of even doing that, but I was so scared.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just...
Didn't want the debt, didn't want that freaking, the weight, the frugality, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, no,
that's why I wanted to put as much down as possible on the house, because I didn't want that debt, because it was 30 years and oh my God, it was just so heavy on my head.
Now, did you feel, because you sold the car that was sort of the pride of your life at that point, like your nest egg, and you made a good timely investment in that, the GTO, it's a cool car, it's going to hold value. I mean, did you feel you needed, it drove you that much more to be successful so you could either buy that car back or show that wasn't a dumb decision? I mean, was there any of that factored in? Gosh, I'm giving up something emotional. Now I'm more emotional about seeing my success in the selling of this house. I'm going to make this work at all costs, or was it just at that point became a calculation for you?
I told myself it was a calculation.
Yeah.
But there was no turning back.
Yeah.
Because that was my redneck bank account.
Yeah. Which
is a wood pile. You got a cord of wood in the, you live in Oak Ridge. You got a cord of wood, that's your bank account. Well, it's a bunch of wood. Well, that's my tinder. This is what I'm getting ready to fuel this thing with. And if I screw it up, I don't even have the GTO anymore.
Right.
Right.
Right. It's not like, like later on in your life, you make an investment, you still have other assets, right? It's not, you don't lose everything.
Yeah.
And there's something about, and this is an important lesson, I think, for any entrepreneur. There's something about when you start, whether it's seed capital, your own capital, you have to feel like you're going to lose everything. And the good news is everything at that point in your life at 26 or whenever we start our entrepreneur journeys, it's not that much. But in the perspective of things, it's a lot to us at that time. And you know what I'm saying? And so
it's everything.
Much harder to do later in life. And some entrepreneurs still do it later in life, which is just blows me away. Like they get all these assets and they're just still willing to like all in, like at the poker table.
Yeah.
And but at that point we can come back to that, because at that point it's more about, are you doing this because you're addicted to it, you enjoy it? I mean, or you just really don't care about assets at all. I mean, that's a different type of a temperament. But I'll tell you, I had something that's a bit similar to your story. I would, with my first company, because you had asked about seed capital, and I went on to raise money in a conjunction with that company. But seed capital, I mean, that's it. That's the starting point. Like, who's going to bet on you?
Yeah.
Right? It's either you got it, or you got family that is right there that's willing to give you a $5,000 or $10,000 check. And there's not many outside of that. For most people, there's not going to be this network that's just going to bet. Even if they think you're a bright kid, you're like 24, 25. Why am I going to give you 50 grand? Like now I'm a 50-year-old guy. I've lived through life. I know that you think you got a good idea, but there's 10 different things that can derail you. I've now had that experience as an investor, right?
Yeah.
So it's very hard for me to overcome that and invest in someone unless I know them really, really well, which is how many 25-year-olds do I know really, really well, right? Right. So you got to put yourself in the position of investor. Even a person that does seed finance or angel investing, they're going to be reticent unless they're like 75 and it's just like play money. And there's some of that out there, like through, I don't know, even like the Ben Venture Conference, when they do the LLC and they bring those to get investors together, and it's $250,000. Each one of them has maybe $5,000 or $10,000 into that $250,000 investment. And for that group of investors, typically speaking, it's nothing, right? At that point of their lives, right? It's sort of a fun thing to do. So that's unusual, right? You got to win a competition and get that money. So let's go back a couple of steps to the seed, where you don't have any experience and investors don't know why they'd want to invest in you because you haven't done anything yet. So the first gig's always the hardest, right?
Yeah.
So how you get into seed capital?
Yeah.
Right. And so you had that. I had something kind of similar in the sense that, although I just didn't have any money, but I had this, I was in law school, right? So when I started that first company, but my great grandmother had passed away at 101. She lived at 101, and wow. And so this is the emotional side, right? And she gave me, it was like $25,000. Like, so she gave each grandkid, 3 of us, $25,000. And she'd save that money sweeping floors, coming over from Latvia, because my parents had migrated from Latvia, right? I was first generation born here. And so, she didn't speak English, the whole thing. She got a job like housemaid, that type of thing. And so, I've got $25,000, and this is the kind of ironic part about it. To some extent, I put it in the stock market. It was sitting mostly in Microsoft. Oh no! So I look back on this, and I'm like, well, what if I just had kept this in Microsoft? You'll hear that the story is kind of interesting, because 5 years later, what happened to that 25?
Yeah.
After I'd started the business, but that was my seed capital.
Yeah.
And it was emotional because I know how what she had done through her life and the sacrifice she'd made, because they had to escape from Latvia, right? She comes over here at 60 years old. I mean, they didn't have the same opportunities that I had, to go to school. I mean, like, anyway, there's so many wrinkles to that story. And so I'm looking at this going like, well, I mean, I'm not going to blow this, right? I mean, I got to make this work. So it was, and while I didn't have the money, it felt like it was my money. It was basically the same, because it's her life's investment, and there's something that I felt connected the whole path. So, seed capital, especially in the first one, even the second, even the third one, you got to put in your own, or it's got to be someone close, and before you go asking other people for money. That's always my kind of thing. My first question, honestly, to entrepreneurs when they're raising money or doing whatever, I'm always like, well, how much did you put in? And they're like, I've been working on this part, I got a job, but I've been working at night, sweat equity. And I'm like, no, I didn't ask you about your sweat equity. Yeah. That everybody's got that.
Yeah.
I mean, dollar per hour, I counted all the sweat equity I put into stuff, I should have paid myself a lot more, right? No, but what did you put in hard cash? Mm-hmm. And if it's not a meaningful number, I'm not even interested, because I just don't feel like you got enough in it. In the context of where you're at, I'm not saying meaningful. It's got to be 50 or 100 grand. If it's $5 grand, but it's the car. I'm interested in that dude. I'm not interested in a dude that's looking for use my money freely to do something.
What percentage
you have to be?
Would you want to see them be invested at the beginning? Let's say the company, they're starting out and it's going to be worth $100,000 in year one or something like that.
Yeah.
What percentage? Is it 20, 30, or do you have any kind of a number like that? Or I think of it in real estate as if I was going to hard money lend somebody.
Yeah.
I don't want them walking away. I want them to have enough down that they don't want to walk away from it.
Exactly.
Right. And so that's 20, 30% somewhere in there. And I wonder if it's the same way with
probably is
with what you're doing.
Yeah, probably is. I mean, you can kind of read the situation for what it's worth. Like, how old is this entrepreneur? Have they had another job? Have they saved? Have they, if they're a 35 or a 40-year-old person, I'm assuming they've saved something. So that number should be a bigger part of that investment. It shouldn't be like nothing. I'd be like, well, you're 40 years old. I mean, haven't you saved something up throughout your life to put 25 grand into this, or, or whatever? If it's a younger person, it's much less than that. By the way, the other person that invested in that, because I think I raised like 100,000 total, was sort of my investment, were my parents and my brother, my younger brother, who put in $3,500, and he's 23. Yeah. Right. So who else is going to bet on you?
Oh, that's cool.
My younger friend, and and fast forward that whole thing. I paid. It all turned out. Everybody made money. This kind of thing. And I felt so good paying him back and all this kind of stuff. But maybe it wouldn't have. I mean, and that would have been very painful. So the downside of the pain of that was obviously very motivating too. So again, the seed capital guy, like, people are looking for seed capital. If they meet that criteria for me, and then it's got to meet a bunch of other criteria. Is it a good idea? Are you frugal? Are you executing all the other stuff that we'll talk about, over time? But that's an important seed capital criteria. And I think a lot of that's lost because it does appear that money is easy to come by. And maybe it is. Maybe there's other investors where it is easy to come by. I don't know. I don't really live in that world or with that sort of temperament. Yeah. And I'm sure you got a great idea, venture capitalists, you go pitch it. They almost don't even look like maybe what you got into. But most businesses, this is why I think this podcast is a place, 0 to 100 million top, or 0 to 50 million they're going to grow. They all started with a different story about how they invest, where they got their money. And most of it's not like it was, came freely. And then the other thing associated with that, Eric, honestly, in my world is like, what are you valuing that investment as far as like what percentage of the company is that worth?
You see that on Shark Tank all the time. They overvalue their company.
Yeah, they just like, it's like this. And and the Shark Tank guys, no, I'll give you this and I'll take 50%. And they're like, oh, I don't know. And then they start talking to their partner.
Meanwhile, you came to me, man.
you came to me.
Yeah.
That goes back to another one of my operating rules just over time in general, which is like, you're as good as your options, right? So we can talk about what we want to do and what we think this is worth, but what are your options? What are really your options? And then, so how are you going to go about and leverage your options to the best you think? Hey, if I felt like if I'd grown up in, I don't know, the Bay Area and the BC, my mom or dad were a venture partner, a big venture capitalist firm, well, I probably have different options. They'd probably groom me and say, okay, here's how you go raise money, and we'll see this a little bit, but then you can. Yeah. Those options aren't available for most people. They're more stories like yours, and to some extent mine. Even for me, I feel like I'm further than most. The fact that my parents and my grandmother give me something so early in my life, right? Yeah. But that wasn't enough to fund the journey. We'll talk more about that later, because the mentor thing came in and was big and all that stuff.
Well, I almost have to cut in here talking about I was terrified to borrow money from a bank. Yeah. A big institutional bank that's publicly traded, and they don't know me, I don't know them, and I don't want to fail anybody. That's probably at the root of it, is that I'm terrified to fail and to let somebody down. Yeah. Not so much that I won't try and give it a go, but you have to have huge stones by comparison to me, because I'm going after US Bank to say, hey, can I have some money to take on this first project I have no idea what I'm doing with? Yeah. And you're doing it with your grandma and your brother and your mom and your own money. Right. I'm just sitting there going, man. See, so when it comes to risk tolerance, I think that takes more risk tolerance than me going after a single family home loan through US Bank.
I don't know, man. It's an interesting perspective that you have on that,
because of my perception of risk.
Your perception of risk, because I almost from my view of the world, I'm more like debt sort of scared me and the interest on debt. And then now they got leverage on my other assets, which I had none. So I don't even know why I would think about it that way.
Cool.
But I didn't have any assets to leverage anyway. Like I had my car, I would have sold my car. I could take a loan against that. But
what a great time to take risk when you have nothing.
You
know what I mean?
Yeah. And so, that's why we have this world of financing and, venture capital is maybe not the right word because it's not all venture capital. It's just angel investment. And if you can find that. And again, I mean, I ran this Opportunity Knox group, which is a bunch of CEOs here in town for a while where I was the facilitator for it. And I was always watching how financing came up and how they thought about financing and, who had gotten to certain levels without it. And like to the extent where you and I were talking about where did it come from. And listen, man, I don't fault the person that, they got the rich uncle that gave him 250. Good for you. I mean,
no,
but I'm just saying you're as good as your options. It's got to be an emotional investment, that first one, where it's going to hurt. You had the same thing. This is my pattern recognition. It's this car you sold. It's like, now I got to do this and it's all I got. And, I had the grandma was influenced and all those things weren't present in my later ventures, right? That was a once in a lifetime that I would feel that way because the investment worked out. And then now I had, I could put more money in myself, like for Manzama, it's basically Mark Hinkle and I, who's my co-founder. I mean, we financed most of the first year growth with pretty big checks,
Mm-hmm.
but we knew we can get to a point where it'd be valued, but more in the eyes of the investment community, right? Because we'd have customers, we'd have, recurring revenue, all the sort of metrics. And that's a whole nother conversation, but milestones essentially that support higher valuations in which we'd want to bring in money. But when I'm younger, I don't have that, right? I can't get it to that point. I got to get it there through the seed. And even then, and by the way, like the first 100, 150, I mean, we lost it. It didn't work. I mean, I had to go back and I had the wrong product. I hired the wrong developer. I mean, I made every mistake you can make. But the will of it, the determination to not quit and still find progress in that moment and keep going, and mentors kind of continue that thing sort of forward, if you will.
Relentless.
Yeah, relentless. Back to our sort of traits. And I mean, and you kind of act like you're brave in the darkest moment, when we're having these conversations. But the reality of it is I was pretty scared and I was pretty beat up and I almost quit myself even a time or two, even though I wanted to see the result.
But you can't show that either.
You can't show that. And I just had someone tell me like 2 months before I was going to close the door, she's like, you got some customers, don't close the door. I'm like, yeah, I'm just not making the progress. And it's been 3 years and I don't know. And then literally like that 2 months later is when I brought in my mentor and CEO, which then we raised, a couple million after that. And that thing just sort of took off. But which is a whole nother thing that entrepreneurs also don't, like when do you bring in someone if you're not succeeding to help you find the success? And when you recognize that you need that, or maybe you don't need that, because there's an ego attached to our own expectations of ourselves. But for me, it was about winning. And for winning didn't have to mean that I had to do it all alone. I could do it with other people. I could do other people's money. I could do it with my money. But ultimately, you wanted to win. It does no good if at the end of the day, you preserved your ego, but you lost.
White men can't jump. You'd rather look good and lose, wouldn't you?
Yeah, right? And there's some of that goes on.
Yeah.
No, there really is. Like, I mean, I was looking at this one thing. I won't even, but it's like, it was this weird investment structure. And I'm like, anyways, long and the short is they I don't know, they weren't letting go of the ownership of the thing like they should have been, given their options.
Yeah.
Again, given your that's why I always come back to is you're as good as your options. And that applies to when you're selling the business. It applies to how you price your products, how much the materials are. Like you can't, all the things you try to control.
Yeah.
But I love this. I love the seed stories, and I can't wait to talk to other people about it too, because there's always a story within the story there.
Oh, go all the way back too. I want to.
That's super inspirational,
Yeah.
Like how you kind of pulled that off and your temperament.
And every version of the story, whether you start with $250,000 right off the jump or $1 million, and then you leverage that for something bigger, that's really an important story too, because it's still scary.
It's
You know,
always scary.
because you still don't know what you're doing on the first round.
Yeah, and your reputation's at risk and all those things. And
Yeah, and what if I screw up $1 million that I just somebody
Yeah.
handed to me? How could I be the guy that's going to
well,
take?
I've done that. Not to the tune of $1 million, but a couple $100,000. You know what? I did a seed capital thing on my second business, and it failed, and I had to But ironically, most of those people continued. They invested in my first thing. They invested in my second thing, not at the seed stage. They invested at the later stage in the first thing. We now had made progress, went out and raised money. Now it's a little more formal. But because I was just honest and I had my own capital in it, I had more than I had in my first one. So I lost right alongside with them.
Yeah.
But I knew it was time to lose.
Yeah.
And the relentless thing didn't apply because I didn't care enough about the outcome and I wasn't emotionally invested in it like I needed to be, like I was on my first one. And I didn't have, said another way, I lacked the passion that was necessary to drive that thing forward.
Why?
I didn't really care about solving the problem that much.
Oh.
I was solving the problem because I knew the technical way to do it, to write the right business plan. I knew the market. I knew how to tell the story. So, I could frame it up. I wanted to do something entrepreneurial again, but I wasn't really finding the thing that moved the needle for me sort of on an emotional level. And why was that different in Manzama? Fast forward 10, 15 years later, and there were a couple other things I did in between that time, but why was it different in my last company? Because it was another software. It was just because I saw more how there was such green pasture there and how it'd be fun to be one of the first ones into that area. And, I could capitalize versus like a technical execution. And it's just, you gotta feel that. I mean, love's a strong word. It might be the right thing, but you gotta have that, that commitment to really solve the problem. Like, I really want to solve this problem because it's a hard problem to solve, or whatever it is you're trying to achieve, with your venture, and if you don't have that, and that's, I mean, honestly, Eric, for me, that almost has to be your number one motivation, because the money will fall into place if you have that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're focusing too much on money, how much money you're going to make, how much money the plan's worth, you're taking the eye off the customer, right? And solving their problem.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I came across this one thing just recently. This guy had raised like $15 million, never been an entrepreneur. He's a 4-year-old guy. And he's just like, and he's going through the motion. He's going to raise another 15. He's like, yeah, we're raising another 15. I'm like, and it was just easy money. It was too easy money. I could already tell that this thing was going to work. And sure enough, 2 years later, it's done.
Yeah.
$30 million gone. Like, what could you do with 30 million? Right? but this is how some people see the world. Like, oh, I just move on to the next thing. Or I've been really successful doing other stuff. I'm just gonna. For me, I'd be like, holy. I mean, if I had raised that much, I would make it absolutely work. Like, it would not be a result like a donut. Like,
yeah,
But we did it more like incrementally. I didn't want to over raise, and I mean, once you raise that much money out of the gate, you lose control of your company right out of the gate. It's not like.
Yeah,
I mean, you may own 10%.
Okay, yeah.
So
that was my question.
Or maybe 15.
Yeah,
you're the CEO that's running it, but
yeah.
you don't control the board anymore.
You just sold yourself into a job.
You just sold yourself into a job.
I don't like
with a good chunk of equity if it all works out for everybody. But wow, are you exposed?
And what happens to the passion when you sell out that much of a company too, and now you're at 10%? I know there's a lot of money to be made still, but you've kind of relinquished control. Like, you've given up the reins a bit. Enough to where that creative control, that independent creative control is there's some passion that's lost probably in that.
Especially if you hit like bumps in the road and as an entrepreneur, we need to go this way instead of that way, but your board can drive you a different way.
Ew.
We'll have some people on that have made those mistakes and later on have maintained control.
Yeah.
But they may have lost control in their earlier adventures, and they put 4 or 5 years in, 6 years in, built value in the company, but still ended up with nothing or very little on the outcome.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Because that's another thing, Eric, is that now you get into like who owns what and what are the preference of the shares when the company sells. And, we should table that, but I would say a big mistake is made on, some people are really prolific fundraisers, but then the terms of the investment really don't favor them if something goes a little bit wrong.
Wow.
right?
It gets so complex.
It gets complex, and you don't get your money out first. Maybe it's 3x liquidation preferences, all these things that we'll dive into, because I think you'd enjoy learning about this stuff and getting more detail on this, because there's just a lot of traps, and it takes you right back to where you should have been in the first place, which is like, just build this thing, find customers, don't overfinance it. And again, I'm reluctant to give that advice on too of a blanket basis, because there's some ideas that are worth that. They're worth the 25 million check right now because it's Facebook.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, but I'm like, how many of those really are there? Not that many. Most are, you got to grind it pretty slow, and then you have a nice little inflection point at some point that does hockey stick you up a little bit, but.
And you get failure rates that are through the roof on upstart businesses anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if you succeed, that's...
So let me ask you another question on the seed capital thing. Let's go back to finish our thought there. So you did this seed thing. Is there anything you would have done? We talked about doing our career different. Would you have assumed more risk or less risk? Are there any scenarios where if you could go back in time, let's say, I know it's easy to have the crystal ball thing, but 2008, we have 2010, you start doing your own deals, you do a bunch of them, and you do well on those, right? That's kind of where you made one of your entry points, right?
Yeah, a pothole.
And in real estate, and same with stock market investment, probably, but real estate, like entry points are huge, right? And the other things you do. So is there anything where you could have said, I should double down on this, or did you feel like you maxed out? Because to me, when we talked last time, it felt like you maxed out that opportunity when it was down. Like if you took on that many projects, I had no idea you were running had that many irons in the fire, because we were still playing volleyball.
I know. That's partly why I burned out. I just stopped playing too.
I was like, man, he was working that much and had that many things going. Or did you feel like, no, that was like, I bet heavily when I saw the most opportunity, and you somehow, tell me, like, would you have levered or changed anything differently in that scenario?
I think this is why I talk about risk tolerance so much. Is the more I think about it and the more I talk about it, the more I think of other people who are up and coming that have no assets, or they're afraid to buy it, or have a 30-year mortgage, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't have very much risk tolerance in scope of everybody else in the big picture. Mm-hmm. For example, during the Great Recession, I had several other investor buddies, and one of them, both of them had teams of guys.
Yeah.
And they were at the courthouse steps and just boom, 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 just pulling off sometimes three purchases in a day. I was there watching.
Yeah.
I'm there studying. I'm trying to learn this situation, thinking maybe I should jump in on this.
Yeah. But
they had a team of guys that would come in and just clean the house up, do everything, get it all ready.
Yeah. And
realtors and investors, they had it was kind of like this, seed capital and venture startup kind of a thing that you're talking about. It's for real estate.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
And they were doing big volume. And I had another buddy who was doing not as big, but like a third as much as the other guy. And he had a team of guys.
Yeah.
And I'm still standing on my dick, going, well, I can fix up that one. And so I'd buy a house and I'd fix it up. And so I did as many as I could as a one-man show.
Right.
So, I hope that it doesn't come across that I have like this ridiculous risk tolerance, because I think I might have even talked myself into thinking that I do.
Yeah.
But I really don't.
Yeah.
And that's why I kind of keep beating that drum, because I think that's kind of a big inertia for folks that are kind of getting going.
Yeah, for sure.
And you're not alone, I guess. And so I had to say that, but had I done it different in the Great Recession, I would definitely have had a team. I would have been at the courthouse.
Yeah.
And I might have at that point even found a money guy.
Yeah.
And used somebody else's money who I knew. Yeah. And I, had a relationship with,
and you could put in. Yeah.
But I was scared to let that person down. Yeah. I think subconsciously, I think that's why I never really scaled up.
That's a good point, though. And that's actually, I like seeing that trait in entrepreneurs, because when they look at it like, hey, I'm just getting money, it's not my own money, and if I fail, I'm going to lose something too. But I almost cared more about failing for other people than I did for myself.
Oh yeah, that's why I said it took big
Well,
stones
that
in your situation.
it was stones, but it was also just I was good as my options. I
Yeah.
know I mean, you couldn't do what we were trying to do in software without hiring a couple of engineers, software developers, and they had to build it, they had to test it. You just can't do it without capital. Like,
Yeah.
there's just no way around it.
Right.
And it's gotten easier in some ways, it's gotten harder in other ways. We can debate that all day with, AI and outsourcing and all that. But at the end of the day, it just takes money because you got to build something that someone's going to look at and touch and use. And that just takes a while to figure that out, it's called product market fit. But I would have rather not done that. I mean, I would have rather that been mine. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, I do know what you mean.
My great grandma, to some extent, that was most of it. She had died, right? So I was only letting down her spirit, which was enough for me. But it's worse when it's like people that you see at a Christmas party, or you go back to your, things get, and you're meeting with family and friends, and if you lost somebody's money, like that sort of sucks. But you're able to do this in sort of a way sometimes where you raise this money and you don't see those people again, right? So it makes it less personal. But right. I want it to be personal. I want every dollar you're spending in mine, I want it to feel like you're spending your own dollar.
Oh, when you invest in something else. Yeah.
I want it to be absolutely personal. You're personally indebted to me, but I'll in the context of you and I, Tom, as friends, I don't really care that much. Like at this point, I look at it like, yeah, I care, but I'm more doing it because I think there's an opportunity there. But I also know probability these things don't work at early stage stuff, or maybe I'm just doing it because I'm being philanthropic. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I want you not to feel that way.
Right.
If you're the entrepreneur, you need to be like, and if I feel that you feel that way, much better chance that I'm going to invest in you. I try to read that when I'm looking at people talking about raising capital or investment, because I don't know, man, it's hard to make money, and you need to respect the fact that someone else went out and did this and made their own money, and saved up however they did it, and not look at that through like, well, they're already like a multimillionaire. Like, this doesn't mean anything to them if they lose that. And it's probably true for some people. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not saying for me, but like venture capitalists or whatever, like, yeah, they plan on losing that, but that's not how you should look at it. And it bothers me if I get any sort of sense of that temperament. I guess the other thing too, Eric, like when you talk about the relentless side of seed and fundraising, all that, you got to kind of have that relentless aspect apply to all parts of your business. So yeah, I'm relentless about getting the product to work for the customer, but I'm relentless about finding ways to finance this company, because if that's what it takes, then I got to go hit every option, and I got to go and do this. Like, not, I don't want to get hard money, that kind of thing, or just some, weird thing like that, but, explore all your options and, you never know where it's going to come from. Let's just put it that way. Like, you think there's these sort of traditional paths like banks or family and friends, but it could be someone that, comes out of the woodwork. They just see, they see what you're doing, they like it, and they're like, I'm in, and then they bring 4 other people in, and you're like, well, how'd that happen?
Yeah.
It's weird when that happens, Eric, because it's happened to me, like strangers, So anyway, I digress a little bit on that piece of it, but
I had a guy like that at one point. My third house. He was an investor, and he knew that I had a knack for it, just a little bit of a knack, because I was just getting going still. But he knew I was frugal, and he goes, "Hey, Staley, how about this? I'll buy the house and you fix it up, and we'll split the profits." I was like, "Hey, that sounds great." And I thought it was going to be good. He seemed like a laid back guy.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But then I got into it, and I'm doing the project, and he's kind of micromanaging me, and then he's like giving me like 1 or 2 checks here and there for the remodel of the house. Yeah. And it was an expensive process, and you could slow the project down altogether by not having money. Yeah. And he was constantly trying to like micro throttle the spending.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's got to be done. We're in. This this has to be done.
Yeah.
And I'm frugal. I'm not wasting money on anything.
Yeah.
I'm still shopping, getting good deals and stuff, but I didn't like that. And I could see that being the case in some of the stuff that you've done too, that, if somebody invests too much, and they were too involved.
Yeah.
Do you ever get that? Like where somebody's kind of like, well, I think you should do this or go this way.
I've been part of like an early management team where I invested some in the company where that became the case. And that's one of the stories that I think will be told another time with
Mm-hmm.
A guest that we have on here, a guy that built several companies, and I saw it sort of from the outside, and it's the losing. He lost kind of control over it to some extent, and I'd like to get his perspective on it because I probably have a narrow view of it, and that's why it's so fun to learn. Like, well, what really went on in that room without kind of, I don't think it's something where you're faulting the other party in this context. That they're just doing their job.
Yeah.
And if they become a majority owner or significant owner, they got to do their job, right? They're trying to, at the end of the day, they're trying to execute for their portfolio or whatever they're doing. So I kind of get why people get like that. I didn't have that as much. I think what I had more was not so much people noodling in on how I was executing the business, but more like questions on like, when am I going to see my money out? When's the exit? Those things become kind of annoying.
Oh yeah,
because you're doing, what you're doing stuff every day to sort of project towards that, and you can't control that 100%.
Yeah,
right. And you have to try to optimize that outcome. But because they're an investor, you got to answer the questions and say, okay, well, here's what we're doing. We're growing here, and this thing failed. Well, why did it fail? Why did this investment over here fail? Like going in another market or whatever. I'm like, well, because nothing's guaranteed. They just don't. So I think that's more of my annoyance. If I have to say there's annoyance that I've had with investors, it's been more of that. Because, you're already feeling obligated. I don't need someone reminding me of my obligation.
Yeah.
You understand? Like, don't you think that's on the back of my mind too? Like,
I have zero patience for that.
I have more invested than anybody. So why wouldn't, both in terms of time and money individually, so why do I need you reminding me of that? Don't you think I'm thinking about that?
Mm.
I mean, if I wanted to create a lifestyle job, I wouldn't have raised money, or I would have raised really little and paid that person off.
When you had so many different professional directions, you could have gone for another company and gotten paid well too.
Yeah.
That, that's an interesting difference, I think, between our stories. I didn't really have an arc.
You could have gone that way too. You just chose not to go that way earlier. Like, we all have really that option if we want to put our head down and grind. I mean, yeah, some things opened up where all of a sudden I got a big paycheck from a bigger company. I had those jobs for a while.
Yeah.
But
I'm just so impatient.
They're not fulfilling. I mean, for me, they weren't fulfilling. For other people,
right.
They might be. Like, if you catch a tiger by the tail, and you're in a fast-growing, fun company that's growing, investing a bunch of stuff, doing different things, like, it might be a great option for you. And it can finance things and keep your entrepreneurial spirit going. That's a hard company to find, though, right? I mean, you're mostly in a big company and they got a role for you, and then but don't go outside that role over here, even though something's really broken over here you could help with. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
And that's hard for me, like, to have those kind of boundaries on me.
Mm-hmm. Same.
And probably true for a lot of entrepreneurs.
I wonder if that's one of those trends, is just fiercely independent, in entrepreneurs. We'll have to talk to more folks about that.
I got a question for you in this regard, because someone said this to me the other day. Like, they asked me this, and this is related to risk tolerance. And I kind of took it, it kind of caught me off guard a little bit when they asked me this. They're like,
cool.
Where did you get your self-assurance from? And I almost didn't like the word, because I'm like, I don't know if I'm self-assured, but I'm maybe coming off that way a little bit, because I'm just talking about, these are experiencing that. And he meant it in a positive way. He wasn't saying like, that's a negative thing. It's good that you have, you believe in yourself and you're this and that. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, that's an interesting question, because I don't think I had that much self-assurance when I was starting out. Did you? I mean,
same with risk tolerance. Like, something is developed throughout time.
It's something that was developed. It was a very incremental thing. I would say more important at the time was just like what you and I talked about before. Like, if not me, then someone else is going to do this. So why not me? I always had, that was more it wasn't self-assured. It was more like, why not me? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why does this guy get to do it? This gal get to do it? You go do it. You know this. Go learn it. Do it. Be successful. But it wasn't like I was like, oh man, I'm so confident in like exactly how my business plan is going to go. I never could really project that story with confidence. It was sort of like, I think this is going to work. I'm going to go for it. Later on, I could, but even then it was sort of, I knew there was a lot of uncertainties with it, and I had to be, I was very forthright with those, right? Like, well, this could happen, or we could get this competitor over here could decide to change their thing and make my life a lot more difficult. or they raised twice as much money and I didn't see it coming, and now they've got more resources. There's always things like that. But
so what did you tell this dude about self-assuredness?
I kind of said, I guess the way that I, that you and I talked about the risk tolerance was, it was sort of a slow acclimation of seeing some positive results. But I still don't like the word.
It sounds cocky, maybe? Or,
yeah. Well, I don't know. I just think there's so much that is not, there's so much out of your control that it's hard to, if you're projecting too much of that, and depending on where you're at in your cycle, I think it's a.
I've met people that are so confident and they had no idea what they're talking about. And you don't want to be that guy, do you?
Yeah, you don't want to be that guy. Right?
Yeah.
Because we're all just like, there's luck involved. There's a big part of luck. And then there's just sort of like everything is changing fast, especially in technology, even in real estate. I mean, there's always changing interest rates, this and that. So it's hard to have a lot of assurance. But on the other hand, if you don't believe in it, to the core, which believing in something to the core means that's synonymous with having self-confidence or assurance, right? So I did have it. I must have had it, right? How could you not?
Man, this is similar to the risk tolerance. We're trying to get at the root of it, and I enjoy the challenge. It seems like it's something that's developed over time.
Yeah.
And you could go all the way back to a 52 Chevy pickup or swimming in a river or playing sports.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to find it in one way or another. And maybe they're really good at poetry or,
And no, that's true.
It's like all kinds of different angles.
But you need it, don't you?
But is it self-assuredness or is it just confidence or just you have not enough to lose that you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to take that chance.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
I don't know. It's hard to take risk if you're already doing well.
Yeah.
Like you got a job that's paying you $100 grand
That's
a year.
Good point.
I feel like that's kind of a handcuff.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, if you make too much money, you're disincentivized to actually jump to the other side and go, I'm going to go work for free and raise capital and solve all these problems, have employees and all this risk. Or I can just collect 10 grand a month or 8 grand a month and live comfortably and get the car.
Yeah.
Yeah,
totally. I'll tell you, it's funny because I look at your world and I go, God, that was put 5% down. That was risky. I mean, and he's going to have that, he's got the loan with the interest rate and he's got to make the money to cover that nut. And
30 years.
You're right. But
a loan for 30 years.
But I'm looking at that and I'm going, that's where I asked you the question. If I go back and do things again differently, I would have used leverage a lot better than I did.
Yeah, same.
And I had terrible risk tolerance in that category. I mean, meaning that I had to put down a lot to feel like I could make this investment in real estate, which was almost dumb. I mean, when I look backward at time, I'll admit that it almost looks like foolish. And I think about a couple investments I made where I paid like all cash for like a certain property, and I could have bought 2 properties, right?
Yeah.
And put half down on each.
Yeah.
Held one, been fine, and sold the other one and paid. And I just in my mind, I just was like, I was always. It's so funny too because here, in retrospect, I'm out there taking pretty big risk on other stuff that has also a ton of unknowns, but I'm not willing to take any risk in this other thing that also has a lot of unknowns. Like why one area, not the other? Like you would think you'd have a similar temperament across asset classes, if you will.
Yeah.
But I was a total wimp looking at it now.
Interesting.
I mean, Eric, it's like ridiculous almost. And I'm not disappointed. I'm not going like, oh, woe is me. I'd have even more in my bank account. I had done these sort of things. I'm just saying I would change that. I 100% would. I'd go back. I'd be like, and I'd be a little more confident in my ability to make an income. But because I didn't know how the businesses were going to work out, and if I'd have a job, if it failed, I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? I downsided my, I de-risked those other things to the point where I had to be super conservative in those things. And it was they were kind of, I mean, really honestly looking at it, those are mistakes. I mean, if you want to look at what was it in my control, right? I can't worry about a mistake that's not in my control, right? Like 5 years later, a recession hit. That's not really in my control, right? I'm just running my business. I just happen to now I'm in a cycle where the recession's hitting. I got to ride this thing out. I know some guys are in that position right now, right?
Yeah.
They built great companies. The recession just hit. Their businesses are down because everything's down in that whole space. They got another 4-year ride out of this. That's just the cycle, you know. But that was within my control. I could have leveraged, you know, those. So I don't know. I'm carrying on about this, and I'm not even frustrated about it. But I'm just sort of almost like, why, you know, how does that? I look at you as a way bigger risk taker as a result, and you look at me as a bigger risk taker.
That's funny. Well, there's just different departments.
That's the irony in it, though. You know?
Well, that's bizarre. Yeah, because I never had to look in anybody's eyes who were loaning me the money. You know,
yeah,
these are just seed capital guys.
I know that. I
starting a big.
I wish I would have kind of thought about it a little bit that way, because they were banks. You know, when you buy, you know, invest in a home or a real estate asset. You know, but
yeah, it just seemed a little less scary to me. But going back like all the way to the beginning of this, you know, the question that, you know, would you have done it differently if you could go back in time? I would have sold that GTO 5 years earlier, and I would have bought a house. I would have tried to buy a house while I was in college and rent it out to some friends.
Yeah,
you know, I would have skipped college and just got into buying houses. You know, where do you start? I could have been in high school. I would have been the earlier I could have done that.
Yeah,
the better. Just to start cutting my teeth and getting the experience.
You have to be emotionally ready for that as a person. Like when you're 17, 18, like, are you really emotionally ready for that? Right? Managing an investment, taking on risks. I get that. Like you could have started earlier, but you're pretty young, dude.
Yeah, I was pretty young.
In the sort of profile of someone, you're pretty young. Like
I dragged my feet for probably a solid 4 years.
Did you?
Where I was poised and ready and knew enough.
Oh, okay.
I don't know about emotionally ready.
So you were still. Yeah, the risk tolerance you weren't comfortable for it. Took a little longer.
Yeah, I had money in the gun.
Yeah.
You know, I had that GTO sitting there, and that's your straight 5% on 100,000.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it was worth 4,500. Okay, cool. I sell it for 4,500.
Yeah.
You know, I'm already there. I just had to finally set that pile of wood on fire.
Yeah.
and not look back. And I was, you know, I could have been probably 4 years earlier. And then I would have gone bigger. I would have used leverage even more. I would have got a team of people working for me, and I would try to keep them going. I don't really like that though. You get a team of guys, and then, well, when's the next project? We gotta feed our kids.
Yeah.
You know, so now you got this team and I don't like that responsibility. And you had that going.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, you started out a business with a team of people, and then you built a product.
Yeah.
I started out with a product that I'm trying to do, and I needed some help.
Yeah.
You know, it was really interesting, the inverses.
Well, you're also looking at controlling your factors to success, right? The more that you introduce people, the more you introduce this, like now your factors of success, you have less in your control because now you got, do they quit? Do they go and do this? You know, so, you know, this sort of solo entrepreneuring, and I know you have a lot of colleagues, and because I met some of the guys that they've done really well doing that same sort of thing. I think this sort of goes more, it does fit in a little bit of risk tolerance, but it also fits into sort of your operating style. Like, you know, for me as an operator, from an operating style, Eric, like I feel like I wanted to work with other people. I feel like that was part of my mission, is like how much could I develop other people and see them grow and see them achieve things personally, you know, within the context of my company, but where it created a successful life or an outcome from them. I really enjoy that, because when I look at people, and especially when I talk to entrepreneurs, you know, not everybody's going to have that risk tolerance or ever want it. They're going to want the job, they're going to want to save, and they're going to kind of incrementally move towards that front. And I want to be cognizant of, not just because like you and I have had these good entrepreneurial outcomes, not everybody sort of fits that mold. So you're trying to find the people that fit that mold or want to pursue that way. Do I think everybody has an entrepreneurialism and the ability to do anything that you or I or everybody else has ever done? Probably.
I kind of feel the same way.
I think
it's in them.
I think it's innate. I think we all have that, but it's got to be, you know, they got to feel like they want it. So if they can't get it, if they can't ever sort of decide to take that leap for whatever reason, you know, other expenses, this and that, then can I give them a structure within the business where I can see them be successful. And I guess the other thing too on that, Eric, is like it's sort of big boy, big girl style. Like, hey, when you join a startup or early stage company, you know, both as the CEO running it, but also just the person coming into that, you know, they're going to get some stock options, but it's kind of eyes wide open. You know, like everybody's doing their best.
Oh yeah.
Everybody's going to crush. Like this may or may not work out for you. You got to, you know, then you got a notch in your belt for work experience or whatever. And
It's high risk.
you know, it's risk for them, but much less, right? They're going to get paid. They're going to have, you know, they're not going to necessarily take on that same level of risk, but everybody does to their own level of risk tolerance. You know, some of my engineers made less in the first couple of years. You know, they got more stock options than they could have made in the open market. So yeah, they were getting paid, but they were taking a risk relative to their tolerance levels.
Yeah.
You know, and I appreciated that, right? And of course, that makes me want to work for them too,
Right.
and vice versa, right?
That's why I want to beat that drum all the time with the risk tolerance.
Yeah,
Because the risk tolerance that they were comfortable with,
yeah,
you know, and that's another conversation about getting into the weeds on risk tolerance in relationship to your spending habits.
yeah,
You know, that you can drag yourself into a real mess with a bunch of payments,
yeah,
you know, on non-assets. And so now you can't take risk to actually do something that has this, you know, like as an engineer,
100%.
that example of that engineer or those engineers. If
Now you can't take the risk because you got too much leverage elsewhere.
Yeah, so you can't even be partly invested in this company.
You just car payment that you shouldn't have. Why do you need to be driving this fancy car? Like,
right.
Drive a beater, you know, like that's you can control that debt. You know, that,
financial noose.
Yeah.
You know, you just slowly start kind of tightening around your neck, and then soon enough you can't even take these risk situations where you have bigger upside.
You just kind of hit on something pretty important, and that goes back into that's such a, like, I call it your personal burn rate. Where's your personal burn rate at?
Yeah.
Right. So I grew up, as you know, in Washington, and I moved to Portland, and I did a stint in California, working for about 5 years down there, working for some companies, and I had to move out of there because the burn rate was going to be too high. Yeah. It was too high for me to take a risk, even though I had a home, this and that. But then you start getting to kids' schools, and I don't want to digress too much into this, but my point on it, Eric, is like I didn't feel like I could step away and take an entrepreneurial risk if I have a big, you know, I write $10,000 checks every month just to live somewhere. But I can move up here to Bend, you know, own a home or whatever, have a few payments, own my cars, you know, drive something that's old for, you know, 10 years. And then, now I got extra capital I could take a risk on.
Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely right. And that probably why is when I go back to doing it again, knowing what I know now, the idiot I call myself in the real estate investing, even though some of those worked out and some didn't, is because I just couldn't. You know, my grandpa was so frugal, everything bought with cash. And, you know, you get these lessons in your life that, you know, they sort of stay with you. And sometimes maybe to a fault, you know, frankly, because the system was there to leverage and benefit from. And, you know, if I had more confidence in my ability to make those real estate investments, self-assurance, risk tolerance, however we want to, whatever bucket we put that in, you know, it could have worked out better. And, you know, so you live and learn, and maybe that's something you pass on as you're sort of helping a kid or a nephew or a first-time entrepreneur trying to proceed this path. We've hit this pretty hard today, but I do want to kind of ask you one other thing before you and I are done with our coffee today, chopping up, because it's just kind of fallen in this category. I just got curious about this from your mind and your temperament. When at this point in your life, now that you know sort of what risk tolerance look like, seed investment, are there guys that you would invest in? Like, and what are you looking for? Or do you find those deals, and what would you need to see from them? Like, if they're, how would you evaluate that even? Because that's kind of my struggle. Like, if I'm looking at making entrepreneurial investments, like, it takes me time to get to know a person, right?
Yeah.
But they need it. They're doing this fundraise or whatever. And so I don't have this FOMO thing. Like, I'm going to miss out. Okay. So I missed out on something, but would you do that? And what would you want to, what are the kind of 2 or 3 things you try to evaluate pretty quickly in that person?
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I would do it. I
love your honesty on that, because I've seen that about you. Like, but like for me, like, I know you so well now, and I've seen how you've done real estate. Like, if you're one of these people, you came in, you're like, hey Pete, I got an opportunity for a house. I'll split the profit. I'd probably put money into it.
Mm.
But yeah. I've had a chance to evaluate you as like kind of an operator and learn about you.
Right.
So,
Well, I assume you're talking about a real estate deal too.
yeah, no, I'm talking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
something that's in your lane. So
Yeah.
let's talk about something that you're looking at. Like for me, it'd be looking at a tech company that I understand. Like if you look at it, someone comes to you with a real estate investment and says, "Hey, Eric, I got this thing. Would you ever do that?" Or are you just so comfortable being a sole operator that you're like, "Hey, good luck. I'll give you some advice." I mean, what's your kind of view towards, that piece of it?
God, I'd have to know the person so well, and over a period of time too, because people can show up with a resume and talk about this, that, and the other, and that's a nice little snapshot.
Yeah.
Here's the Polaroid of you, but I'd have to know you for a long time, and probably in another capacity. Like
it's a hard read, isn't it?
It's really hard.
It takes a long time to make that read.
I always like that on Shark Tank. I always bring Shark Tank back up, but I always like that when they go, I'm not really investing in your company. I'm investing in you, and I really get that. I completely can relate to that, and the company, of course, is important, but that aside, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to through sports, like through volleyball, and somebody for a long time. You see them when they get flustered. You see them when everything's going well.
Yeah.
You see the temperaments, because I think you can see a lot about a person's style in sport.
Yeah.
Especially a team sport, like doubles beach, doubles beach volleyball. I think of how you bring players up. You're really good at like enhancing somebody else's skills.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's obvious because the work that you did, the businesses that you started out with an idea, and then got people who could enhance that idea and then help them get even better at it.
Absolutely.
And gave them some ownership. Like, wow, that's how you play volleyball.
Yeah.
And
thanks. I appreciate that. I wouldn't see myself through that lens as a player, but now that you're saying it makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. Looking back on yourself and having another sort of window in which to evaluate this person. And, I don't want to put everybody under a microscope either, but when I'm in these scenarios, I'm trying to make a decision on investing in something. I look at that. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you a case in point. I had another one where I've known this guy for a long time. I made this investment in this, this car wash thing, and I don't know the first thing about car washes, right? But I know this guy.
Yeah.
And I might be wrong on this. But I know how meticulous he is. I know I've watched him like not do things. I've watched how well he's done on other things. And he comes in, he's bringing this detail, and I'm like, okay, I want to diversify some stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, kind of a deal. And I did evaluate it, but not to the extent I would normally evaluate something where I don't know something. Now that makes me feel like, well, maybe I didn't do enough due diligence, right? Mm-hmm. But it goes to the person. I'm willing to bet on this person. I think this is a challenge for entrepreneurs, and is that, especially in the fundraising thing, why they always ask, like, why is fundraising so difficult? Well, there's part of your answer.
Yeah.
That's why the seed capital, the inception capital, whatever. Yeah. That's why it's grandma, grandpa, or your parents. I mean, sorry, those are the people that really know you. And if you want to really risk it, bring some of their friends in there too. They may have seen you since you were a little kid, because no one else is really going to, especially you're young, they have nothing on which you to judge you on.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So I guess moral of the story is I sort of wrap up this thought myself on that notion. It's going to be really tough and expected to be tough. And, like I said, you're as good as your options. But that's why I asked you the question, because I figured it was the same sort of lens in some respects. I mean, I'd love to help out some other people here and there, but you don't know, how are you going to get there?
I love the question.
Yeah.
I won't stop thinking about that for a while.
Well, and I'm also, sometimes I think about, honestly, Eric, in the context of like some of the people that I would say invested in me, like they didn't know, I would say they had more risk tolerance because they didn't know me that well.
Yeah.
Right. A few years here in Bend or whatever. And I appreciate their investment. And sometimes it was even surprising. And I'm kind of humbled by it, frankly, because I wasn't sort of expecting like someone say, oh, well, hey, can I put in some money in this? I'm like, okay, yeah, but this is a risk. I would always say this is going to be a risky thing, even though I believe obviously in success, but because if I were in their shoes, I wouldn't be saying that. No, okay. These are my friends. If I were looking at their thing, I'd be like, no, that's all right. I'll pass on that. And I did. I passed on a few things,
Yeah. Yeah, invest in the person, and you don't want them cocky, but you don't want them not confident either.
Yeah.
And you don't want them too risk tolerant. but obviously they're taking a risk if they're looking for money.
Yeah.
So that they have to fit in these brackets that are just broad enough that you can kind of, because everybody's going to have their different skills and skill sets and experience even. But my gosh, what a good question that is. I don't know how anybody does it, really.
Yeah.
Well, I'll think about it more.
Yeah, think about it some more, know. And it kind of, the last thing I'll say on this, or at least touch on, is I so admire the bootstrap entrepreneur, the one that didn't need to raise anything. Like, if I could have done that on my own, probably there was a way.
But you did do it on your own.
No. But I'm saying without seed capital, without any, like, it's like credit cards, whatever. Like, dude, well, there's stories of that. Got people that do that. I mean, even like the Phil Knight story is a little like that. Like, like he just maxed out all these credit cards flying around.
Yeah.
Like some people, like if you can control that and you're willing to, if the world comes crumbling down, like you're going to owe that debt or have to declare bankruptcy, like, and then start over. And some people do, and they're successful. I mean, I got to say, just me personally, I really admire that. I admire that about your journey because it's 100% bootstrapped. And I bootstrap part of it for sure, especially the later ones, bigger chunks and everything like that. And 100% bootstrap is 100% of the results. Do you know what I mean? Like it's great to get capital, but I'm giving something up along the way, and it's making maybe I sleep a little bit better at night because I'm not risking my entire nest egg, but I'm giving something up. So you always have to look at it that way. If you've got the stomach for it and it doesn't like totally, you can't sleep at night, your health's not compromised, then bootstrap there's a lot of, that's kind of my mind. I mean, now that I'm 25 years fast forward, I kind of favor that as much as possible.
Yeah. As much ownership as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. So.
Well, the American dream is alive and it's out there. I mean, it's the bootstrapping story that it's happening right now. Somebody else is shoveling rabbit manure, doing the same thing right now. Or they're baling hay or mowing lawns or whatever it is. But they're all in the same spot. Like you said, I think everybody's capable of it.
Yeah. And I guess what's inspirational about that to me, Eric, is like it sort of removes the perception of, hey, you got money, like you need money to do this, or you got to go out and raise money. No, you just need to find a way. And if that option's available to you, great. If it's not, go find a way.
Yeah.
Right? And don't make that an excuse for why you're not achieving the result that you want to achieve. Because you'll find a way. It's
generally psychological.
Yeah.
The reason that's in the way.
Yeah.
At least in this country.
Yeah.
Dear Lord, in this country. So you remember Kiva? It was a fundraising site for international.
Yeah.
I think they got sort of a black mark on something, but that was a really interesting deal where you would loan $100 or $50 to some gal in Ghana.
Yeah. I did the Kiva stuff.
And so when I think of seed capital and I talk about, I'm shoveling manure and that's, for the US, that's kind of a pretty fun story, relatively. But then you think about this gal in Ghana and she's raising $50 so she can buy a chicken or a couple chickens so she can start selling eggs. Yeah. She's trying to raise $50 and that's an exaggeration. She's trying to raise $20.
No, I know.
To buy 2 chickens so she can start selling eggs.
Yeah.
And that's just the same seed capital story, but it's just at the very, very bottom.
It's at the very bottom. At the
exact bottom. And it's a spectrum.
Yeah. And most of the time when you're doing Kiva, or some people when they're doing Kiva, you're kind of looking at it as like, hey man, it's philanthropic, or I might be writing off this $100, but good for this person, like for going for it. Yeah. But then they pay you back.
Yeah.
And you're like, holy smokes. Yeah. Like I wasn't even expecting to honestly see that. And then they write about their success and it's working and love that story, dude.
But so relativity in relationship to access to other people's money in order to take a chance for a better life. Look at the US and look at all of the vehicles of money that are available.
True.
I happen to like the real estate direction.
Yeah.
You got investors, but these are just 2 stories.
Right.
These people in Ghana.
Yeah.
She's trying to come up with $25 for a chicken. Right.
Yeah.
And so Can you imagine how lucky we have it here by comparison to there?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what wrecks my head is that I'm glad I'm not trying to raise money for a chicken.
Yeah.
You know, at least we started out as a couple clicks ahead of that.
Yeah, a couple clicks ahead. Yeah, you're right. Right. So a good point. So it's hard to kind of, make excuses.
They're all in your head.
It's a little tough here in America to make excuses still. And I want to say that in a way that's really respectful still for people that come from nothing and a broken environment. And because America isn't all, it's not all roses, right? In terms of everybody's sort of access or just temperament or confidence or
some of it's education, like the conversations around the dinner table, and some of the root skills that you get with your family, whether it's frugal or too aggressive or, when you've made it, you got a 66 GTO and you're set now.
Yeah.
You achieved the American dream, and that could have been the apex, but there was just a little something different, going on there too, that it wasn't just enough.
Right on.
But before we end,
I
feel like we got all these topics we got to keep talking about, but I want to ask you, like, what's the one thing, well, just one a week or one every podcast.
Okay.
What's the one thing that is like bringing you a bit of joy, that's moving the joy-o-meter, that didn't cost you much money? Now, I was just using an example. Or you got one?
No.
I'll give you a second to think about it.
Yeah, give me a second to think about it.
Kind of hit you blindsided.
Wait. So something that's giving me joy that's not costing me any money. I'm just
not a lot of money.
Not a lot of money.
Okay. Well, things that money can buy.
Yeah, things that money can buy that gives me a lot of joy.
Yeah, because it seems like
okay, yeah, that's good.
I'm going to keep beating this drum too.
Yeah.
Because I have a tough time thinking about the things that really bring you a lot of joy that money can buy.
Yeah.
And even a lot of money, like a little bit, a lot, like in that spectrum of, between $1 and, I don't know, $20,000.
Yeah.
Where do you get, what's going to make you happier?
Yeah.
The philosophy of money and the benefit it brings is kind of, I can't stop chewing on this. And,
okay.
And my example, I'm going to use it, and I'll save a bunch of examples for later.
Yeah.
There's not that many. Is I was telling you earlier, is the bar soap?
Yeah.
That you buy?
Yeah. With the
Yeah, and it's got the little
grains in it and stuff like that.
Nubbies in there.
Yeah.
And it kind of scrapes off.
I get that stuff too.
And
love that soap.
And you get the big bar, you know? So you got a good handle on the thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. It might be $10 or 20, 15. I don't know what it is. They're too much money.
Yeah.
It is too expensive, and I love it.
Yeah.
Every time I take a shower, I get a little kick out of it. So that's an example of like those little things that.
Yeah.
And you don't think it. Maybe not every day you take a shower you think about it, but there's some cool renewable.
Yeah.
Things like that. So you got anything?
Yeah. No, I mean, I probably mine are, they fit in that same category as you. Like if it's something like that is actually creating some joy I otherwise could not have without it. So let me the simplest example that sort of came to my mind is like, okay, buying a really nice setup of backcountry skis so it's lighter. I can get higher up in the mountains. I don't tire out as quickly. I get a different view that I'm not otherwise going to get.
Yeah.
I get more time in nature. Well, that's like a direct,
that's a great
that's
example.
That's a direct payback on money well spent that I might have paid twice as much to have that sort of similar outcome, So,
yeah,
those are kind of all over the place, if I really stop and think about it, because, that's to me becomes part of the value of money. I think the other side of that coin is, how you waste money, and, why are we wasting so much money on so many things that maybe don't give us that outcome?
That's what I'm reverse engineering this question from, is that it seems like the higher dollar things, they're only temporary, and then it just, not all of them, but you get that new car or whatever it is, and you're stoked for a couple weeks, and then maybe a month later you kind of forget about it.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't move the needle anymore. And it's an important thing for me, because what's the point of earning a whole lot of money?
Yeah.
Past a certain point of like freedom of schedule.
Yeah.
And those sort of things. What's the point of the next clicks? I want to know the next clicks.
Well, the long tail on that, I think, Eric, to some extent, is now if you have more means to help other people philanthropically, or you now can spend time doing things that don't require you to make money.
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you're giving back to society in more of a holistic way, because you're not sort of tied to, having a financial need. And that's
cool.
I think that's a big one.
Yeah.
That's a big one. And it's nice, like, to have some dollars, and obviously we all give philanthropically and stuff like that. But if you look at like the Gates Foundation, we talk big money. I mean, they're moving the needle on malaria and other stuff and solving problems in the world. So how many houses do you need to buy before you're like, okay, well, this is a dumb way to spend money, and you figure out that it's better to spend that. So personally, I think that makes a lot of sense. But when I see, this is just my own view of the world, if I see someone that's made a lot of money and they're just buying 10 cars, I'm just sort of like, in my mind, I'm going, I don't really get it. I don't know what that does for that person. Or I feel on some level there's an insecurity there.
Mm-hmm.
And good for them. They can do whatever they
Yeah.
want. I'm not here telling them not to do it, but I'm just saying, if I'm in that category and I'm in a very modest aspect of that at all, then I'm trying to move the needle by doing things that are helping the world, in a meaningful way.
That's cool.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I haven't really shifted over completely to that yet, I guess. But at one point I was playing this little thought experiment, and it was like, if you won $100 million on the lotto, what would you do with that money? Because now you're not even having to earn it. And what will you do with $100 million after taxes, $50 million?
Yeah.
What are you going to do that's going to really make you happy? And I started saying things that I surprised myself that I was like, no, actually, nope, I don't want those things.
Nope.
No, that's the hangar, the maintenance, whatever. Like if you bought like a jet, you'd have to. I don't know how to fly a jet, so I got to have a pilot.
You got a pilot. You got insurance. You got blah blah blah.
Maybe I'd fly first class. That'd be the difference.
Yeah.
But I was gonna buy all these houses in this one neighborhood. That was one of the things.
Yeah.
Because they're just such a good asset, and I'm like, I don't really need more money. I've just won $50 million.
Yeah.
Why am I buying more assets? So now I've been thinking about that ever since. It's kind of, maybe for anybody listening too, it's like, well, you win $100 million. Ask yourself what you'd buy, and then ask yourself why, and would it bring you joy? Because it's not as obvious for me.
Yeah.
Is what I thought at first.
Well, coming back, touch on this a little further. You're also talking about your motivation as an entrepreneur. What is your true motivation?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And your true motivation, I think a genuine motivation for entrepreneurs that I look for is, they want to make money, but they want to do it for the reason you had talked about, is like have freedom of schedule,
mm-hmm.
be able to travel, work in my health and all this kind of stuff. That's where, to me, that was always the motivator of having financial success of any level. Is like, because when I don't have that, then, now you're tied to the desk and things like that. But beyond that, now you start going the delta beyond that. I don't know how much more there really is. If I have to be honest, and I don't,
I agree.
So that becomes a scenario of like, this is a whole different conversation, but being in this place where you have that ability to you have full freedom of schedule. Like, how do you transition your time to be really active and enjoying life and participating in life still, right? And finding means for that, because, you can't play volleyball 6 hours a day anymore, right? So, we're both sort of in, and that's a moving target for me, frankly. But I do feel that every year, more and more, I'm sort of checking more boxes, kind of accumulating more ways to spend my time, money to some extent too, philanthropically, to have that be the equation that I want it to be, short of what we had to do before, which is we had to make sure whatever we were doing was driving an income.
Yeah.
That's the freedom. That's the ultimate. If you can get, if you find a place where you can get there, then, but I don't know, Eric, there doesn't tend to be much beyond that, really.
It's fun to chew on that.
It is fun to chew on it,
And I'll never stop, I think. But
well, honestly, doing this right now, having this conversation, and if anybody's listening, they're getting help from our entrepreneur experience. That's what I'm saying. That's my part of my motivation on the podcast. Like, how do we relay experiences where we've had some good results, work-life balance, monetary, whatever, luck or not luck, however someone wants to read into the equation. If it helps them, then man, I'm feeling good about my day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of how I measure things at this point, you know, and honestly, maybe we should measure things like that earlier in our lives. Like, you know, as opposed to be worried about our own success. Like, how am I making someone else successful here as I go through my company building or my real estate projects, or, you know what I mean?
Wow.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I was listening to a podcast this morning, and there was a quote, I guess, from Picasso. I think he said something like the meaningfulness of life is to find your passion, and the purpose of life is to give it away for free. I thought that was pretty.
Love it.
Kind of spot on for.
That's a wrap.
Yeah.
That's a wrap.
Yeah.
All right, brother.
Yeah.
Good chatting with you as usual.
As always.
We'll be catching up again soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.